All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more people that will be joining. My name is Chris Mesa, one of the board members on LDSIG, and I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a couple guests that will be presenting together. We have Doug Harding, who's actually one of the is the vice president of the LDSIG, and we really have what I would call a layout design review case study. So kind of walking through the process that they went through in trying to get Chris the best layout he could have, given his constraint. So that's what the discussion will be. We'll ask that you put your questions in chat. We'll also ask that I will mute everybody to begin with, so we don't have any background noise. You will see a short little poll. Please just fill that real quick. That helps give us some information about what to do next. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Doug. And Doug, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you, and you can go ahead.
Very good. So,
I'm going to mute everybody, but so just give me 1 second. And then I asked you to unmute, Doug. So
I did.
All righty. It's all yours.
Well, we welcome everyone to this exciting afternoon of the Layout Design SIG. And I know there's folks from all around the world. I'm recognizing a few names who are joining us. Some of you I've met through conventions and other facilities. We're sitting in the basement of my house where my train layout sits. You can see a little portion of it behind us. I have with me in the yellow shirt is Chris Bertelson, who contacted me about a year and a half ago. It says we met one time previous, but my memory is so short I don't recall, but it doesn't matter. He wanted a little assistance with designing a layout because he was in the process of building a new house and getting ready to move into it. Chris lives about 24 miles from me, give or take. So it was convenient for him he's getting into understanding operations, et cetera. He was here yesterday to crank the throttle with us here in the basement. So welcome, Chris, and we will take you through this. I've got a PowerPoint with me. I also have over to the side another LDSIG member, Jim Leisure, and Jim he has come to observe and learn as well. Jim also came to operate yesterday. So let me share the screen. And this is we call it the LDSIG Virtual Clinic, one of the services we try to offer as the LDSIG. I've titled it a design consultation. As I said, Chris contacted me. In case you're wondering, I'm vice president of LDSIG. I don't know why they suddenly just hung the title on me, gave me a shirt that says vice president on it. So I'm in charge of all the vice. I also am an NMRA. So it doesn't mean a thing except for they think I'm an expert in a few things. Also, I'm a retired pastor, so I'm used to talking without people interrupting me, just in case you wondered. So let's move on here. We can get the slides to work. There we go.
You're not going to pass the hat, are you?
I could, but I don't think it'd collect anything. Yeah. When Chris contacted me, he wanted to get together. He had done a drawing based on some design and concepts. He had some givens and druthers. The space for his layout was, of course, a given. He had 15 8-inches by 16 feet with a closet door in the southeast corner, 5 inches from the end. And hopefully you can see my pointer, and this is where the closet door location is. And so this was the room, and he had come up with this idea. He was looking at mainline curves of minimum radius of 24 inches. He wanted to handle 50 and 60-foot box cars from the 1970s in HO standard gauge. He wanted the capability for continuous running and DCC operation. And so then he was, following in the footsteps of John Armstrong with the Givens and the Druthers, his minimum 24-inch aisle space. And you can see he's kind of got that drawn in here. You see the benchwork outline in the darker blue. No need to reach more than 32 inches into the layout. 28-inch curves on mainline he would like to have feasible. Easements for realism. Then what's interesting about his concept was modeling industries from his hometowns, interchanging with another railroad, and then the longest mainline possible within the space he had, but running trains of about 8 to 10 cars. He wanted some staging, he wanted some yard switching. So let me walk you through what he's done, for industries. He wanted an elevator that would ship grain to an ethanol plant. And of course, the 70s ethanol wasn't quite as big as it is now, but he wanted a fertilizer plant that would receive anhydrous ammonia and other fertilizers and chemicals. He wanted a feed mill that would receive feed and grain as well as hay, a lumber yard that delivered lumber, the ethanol plant that receives the grain and then ships out ethanol, and of course, in ethanol tank cars, an anhydrous plant that ships anhydrous out, and a battery factory that would receive lead and plastic and then ship out the batteries. Now, all these industries are related to some family connections that he has in the towns that he wanted to model. The elevator, let's see, the elevator and the feed mill those were things your father was involved with. Is that correct, Chris?
Father and grandfather.
Okay, and those were in the town of Missouri Valley, Iowa, which is over on the western border of the state, just north of Omaha. Chicago Northwestern was the main line through there. So, the Chicago Northwestern, of course, was a strong influence for him. The battery factory, you can see it's marked here at the moment, was in Corydon, Iowa, which is where your wife is from. Is that correct?
Yep,
And her father was an employee there at the battery factory?
he owned the factory.
Oh, he owned the factory. Well, this is getting better yet. So, and so he starts sketching in that an area representing Missouri Valley with the grain elevator, the lumber yard, the feed mill, and of course here's a fertilizer plant and some anhydrous tanks. So this is an early sketch he did, and we wander around. I believe this was the ethanol plant up here in the corner. Is that correct, Chris?
Correct. Yep.
Yep, and wander down around. We can see a branch going off here with the possible idea of bridging across the closet on into the rest of the basement, or at least part of the basement, should he get permission from the real estate control individual in this household.
Yep.
We won't discuss that matter at the moment, but you all have gone through that at different times, I'm sure. So, but you'll see, here's the battery factory. Now, Missouri Valley and over here in Corydon are separated by about 150 to 200 miles in the state of Iowa, served by two different railroads. So we're working with some concepts that he wanted to include. And you can see there's a small yard here and a turntable sketched in, and you can see a siding, passing siding up here. And of course, this connection for possible interchange and maybe expansion of the railroad. So have we covered everything, Chris?
Yep.
All right, so this is what Chris, well, he brought this to me, but then he brought another sketch, and let me go to that one.
I might mention this room is open on the bottom. So across the bottom, there's not a wall there. So there's access to that whole peninsula.
Okay, so let's see. And let's see, he's been consulting with some various other people. So this is a drawing he emailed me this morning where I was off doing church stuff, big celebration things. But you said this was an early on, someone helped you come up with a concept for this space?
Yes.
And I can see we've got what looks like a large donut hole in the middle here with bench work going all the way around. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, and this had a duck under to get in there, and as I get older, the idea of a duck under seems less amenable.
Well, I think everyone in the layout design SIG would encourage you to avoid duck unders. Lift outs and tilt bridges and things are acceptable, but crawling underneath, especially when you got to squat down and get on a mechanic's creeper or something, that's just a little bit too much. And so Missouri Valley got a yard injunction here. Cordon, Iowa with I forgot to mention the quarry. You also were wanting to include Winterset, the town you live in now, where there's a limestone quarry.
Yep.
Provided a lot of limestone for the cement factories in Des Moines. And so that was something that we started working on to include. And you've got Corydon, the anhydrous, served by the CB&Q. This is the 24-inch minimum radius, and the scale of the drawing is roughly 1 inch equals 1 foot. So, and all terrain can be moved to fit industry yard configurations. No grades whatsoever, so this is all flat land, which most people think Iowa is flat until they arrive on a bicycle. That's a different story. So, but this was a sketch you rejected early on because of the duck unders. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, now, and this was a
Power zones.
oh, the power dome, same.
Yep.
I didn't get that one removed. Okay, and now here is a refinement of that drawing in some way.
I think this is staging underneath the other deck.
Okay, all right. I see where it says upper deck and lower deck. So some staging that would come out of here. This I never saw, so I didn't know these drawings existed until today. So I'm just going to move on. I hope everybody's enjoying the commentary. So this is, again, we're back to the original slide of what Chris brought to me. And I want to share with you the next slide. He happened to journey out to California to an event in Sacramento, California, where he ran into one Seth Newman and Jim Providenza at I believe it was a regional layout design SIG gathering, which you were attending. And so you took your sketch and shared it with that group and asked if there was, would you consider using this as a small layout or, offer any thoughts for improvement? And you can see there were a lot of scribbles on his original drawing. So, in fact, this peninsula here they suggested removing that and bringing the main line around here. Oops, sorry about that. I jumped ahead. Making this into a G shape, that is taking this blob here and moving it. Oh, I got to quit doing this, touching my mouse. Moving it out into the middle room here to get a longer main line run, and also allowed, and widening this out so there's a little bit more room here for the industries that he wanted to include. Putting in I think the quarry over in this area. So, and the turntable was, I think it was moved onto the blob at that point, and still keeping a stub end yard in this spot. So, as you can see, they also suggested a mainline curve of 30 or 36 inches. So this is when you start getting different people involved in the discussion and the process. And I do know that Seth and Jim are very active out on the San Francisco area with the LDSIG as well as the OPSIG. And I've been out there a couple times and have attended one of their LDSIG. Throw out the idea on the floor and everybody jumps in with ideas and pencils and starts, well, what if we did it this way? And what if we did that? So it's great to have that opportunity to share some ideas, get some thoughts. So Chris, I'm going to ask you if you have anything more you want to share about that experience.
It was just great to get experienced perspectives on this, and to I think it has the same running length, but I like the G idea. I wanted to explore that a little bit further in NMRA.
So let's move to, this is a drawing that Chris, based on that conversation with Jim and Seth, he refined his drawing. And you're doing this in some sort of a CAD program, is that correct?
Yeah, any rail.
Any rail CAD program. So, and you know, he's come up with a name for the railroad, the Sheraton and Boyer Railroad. Sheraton is a town in south central Iowa.
It's a river.
The Sheraton River,
Right.
that's right.
Yeah.
That goes, and then Boyer is a river in western Iowa that dumps into the Missouri River down around the Omaha area.
And it happened to be my initials too.
Look at that. So the CBR. So now the concept, you know, we've mentioned Missouri Valley Corridor. I briefly said something about the limestone quarries at Winterset, which is where Chris is currently living. And then the Blair, Nebraska is across the river from Missouri. So we got that continuation of Chicago Northwestern, which is the general theme that he is wanting to include in here. So, but we can see now, you can see the G shape. The green is essential to the general bench work shape with some nice curves. We got a kind of a pinch point here to just less than 24 inches, but one person can get through here. We got another pinch point at 21, 22 inches, but we get a larger area in here for several people could congregate. And also here in front of the closet door, there's an area where a couple people, so you could have 3, 4, 5 people in here if you wanted to with an obsession. He did get, by widening this little peninsula out, he got the 28-inch curves in. And again, this G shape here, the 28-inch curves. We've got Winterset over here with the quarry. Sketched in here something about an engine shed maintenance area. Chris and I in our conversation, because he's wanting to model the 70s and maybe even the 80s, I suggested just removing the turntable because they do take space, and for a smaller layout, that can become a concern. Instead of a turntable, just put in a couple parallel tracks with an engine shed. For modern diesels can go 2 directions either way without too much concern. And so you can, you know, take less space for a similar engine maintenance storage area. So he took that advice in. Let's see, we've got, 20 and 24-inch radiuses on the sidings. Still some concerns about this yard. You weren't quite happy with that design, if I recall correctly.
Right, and I wanted longer.
And then with
tracks at
it sketched in a yard up here, but you know, coming in with the yard ladders the way it was, it got down to this last tractor here would hardly hold an engine, let alone any cars. And then Blair, Nebraska, up here in the corner, this is where the ethanol plant was going. So as you know, the issues with the yard, as I suggested, removing the turntable. He's settled on Digitrax for DCC. You hold your opinions on that. I have opinions about Digitrax myself. I use a different brand, but that doesn't matter. It works. And the train lengths, again, we're talking 6 50-foot cars plus an engine and caboose. Keeping that Chicago Northwestern livery in mind, but also aware that Corridor was served by the CB&Q. So let's see if anything here I forgot in this regard, Jim or Chris.
No, I think that's it. I wanted the curves, I wanted the easements, but it was pretty tough. That yard is pretty short up at the top.
Okay, so I'm moving, and after Chris and I met, we came up with, let's see, did I get the right slide? Yeah. Okay, I suggested doing a trapezoid shape for the yard, putting yard ladders in like this, and then you get most of the tracks in the yard are roughly the same length. And that meant moving this track here over and putting in the curved turnout. Of course, those of us who have been following the current developments in the hobby know that Walters has picked up the Shinohara line, revamped it, and they're bringing out a lot of new track components, including curved turnouts and larger curved turnouts, so that if you don't want to hand lay track, you could do a track plan like this. And so you can see this yard got shrunk down to just 2 tracks, this main line got moved over, a nice curve coming in, and allows the development for this yard with 4 or 5 tracks in here, each of them about 6 feet plus in length. So train length and for each of those tracks for the yard. And again, the continuous curves around here. You can see the engine shed maintenance area with several tracks coming in here, again, using a curved turnout to lead into them. The Blair, Nebraska, essentially being the ethanol plant. Here is we got a little bit of a switchback in here. So we got the Winterset Quarry, a place to load some hoppers with limestone. Down here at the bottom, we see Corridon with 2 tracks here for the battery factory, where loads coming in of plastic pellets and covered hoppers, and then lead oxide and lead coming in, and then the components and other components for batteries, and then shipping out finished batteries. Now, the name of the battery company was
Volt Master.
Volt Master Battery, and they made a variety of different sizes of batteries, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And I know my grandparents banked in Corridon, so I know the community, and I know that the battery factory has been a significant part of that community for some time. So
They celebrated 100 years of making batteries there just last fall.
really, wow.
Yeah, there's a larger factory now. They've tripled in size.
So important reason to include that on the layout, also keeping peace in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, so moving over here, we got Acme Cement Plant using the Winterset limestone. There are 2 cement factories in Des Moines that started shipping limestone from Winterset up there on the Rock Island into Des Moines. And I'm acquainted with those factories because they were also served by the Minneapolis and St. Louis, the railroad that I model. And so so he's moving limestone from here all the way around the layout somewhere over in here so he can get to the cement factories, that's a nice move. Then we've got keep losing my mouse. I hope you're all following me. We got a nice sighting here. We come down into, this is Missouri Valley, again over the western border of Iowa. And you will see we've got the fertilizer plant where we got some anhydrous tanks set up for and hoppers of bulk fertilizer. Here's the ag chemical and fertilizer building here. We come around the curve. He's got the feed mill and the lumber yard that your father and grandfather worked at.
Yep.
And so they would be receiving, he's got boxcars of goods, but the feed mill would be covered hoppers, possibly. You would have the lumberyard getting bulkhead flats, guns, boxcars that could all be going in there with supplies. And then over here, we have a grain elevator that is going to be local farmers bringing in their corn, and this grain elevator will be shipping corn out to that ethanol plant clear across the room up in Blair, Nebraska, as well as the soybeans that also would come in on the interchange. Now, notice the closet door is still over here. It's not been conflicted in whatever way, but we do have a nice long track here that's intended for interchange with the Union Pacific and points west. Future use could be, this could be then a line leading across the closet with a lift out of some sort into the expansion of, if he gets permission from the real estate control agent to move into another part of the basement.
There's another 60 feet down there, Doug.
60 feet?
I could go all the way to California.
That's about what I got here. We could design a much bigger layout.
Yeah.
We could go operate. Yes. So, well, anyway, now that, this is design number 4, a refined G track after some feedback from me and as well as from Seth and Jim, reshaped the yard into the trapezoid, refined this engine service area. He settled on using code 83 microengineering track, which is a very fine track. I like microengineering. As I mentioned, the Digitrax DCC. We discussed what size wires to use with DCC, and so he's going to use 14 gauge solid for his bus. That says bug. Oh, and then 18 gauge for his feeders, which is, I think, what a lot of us would recommend in that regard. If we've got 2 sidings and interchange, the train length of 6 50-foot cars, engine and caboose, so 1 or 2 people could have a great afternoon or evening running on this layout. So, but we're not done yet. Let's move on here to the next screen. After Chris and I got together this was over the holiday season last winter, he had a chance to consult with Thomas Klimovsky, who completely rearranged his layout and put in a lift bridge. Here you can see where the closet door, some sort of lift bridge going across there for the continuous running. Now, I've not had a lot of discussion with Chris related to this design. Do you want to share anything, Chris?
Well, I heard Tom on the Second Section podcast, and he said, if you've got designs, get in touch with me. I'd be happy to look them over. So I got in touch with him, and he was generous with his time and visited with me for an hour one day, and even drew this this layout, which looks an awful lot like his layout in his book on doing the right size layouts. And it had some appeal. His contention was that when he built his layout, he wanted continuous running. He made a bridge so he could, and he ended up never using the continuous running. It was enough without it. I'm not so sure I would follow that path, but I was interested to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course up the top we've got stub end yard, a couple through tracks, and then the stub end here with 3 or 4 tracks. And you can see, here's Missouri Valley here with the elevator and the lumber dealer, and then the fertilizer plant here. Looks like we lost the feed mill, and down here the quarry for Winterset, and of course a much larger area for Cordon and the battery factory with a runaround track. So, and then Blair, Nebraska looks like it really got expanded with we've got 2 different industries here related to the ethanol industry. Is that correct?
He did a lot of research on Blair and thought it looked like it was going to be the hub of this operation. So he found a couple of other industries. They're right on the Missouri River, so a lot of things come up on barges and then get loaded onto rail or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But Blair is not my hometown. Missouri Valley was, so I wasn't so enamored with Blair, though the layout was very interesting.
Okay. Well, and then Thomas also came up with another variation where he eliminated the lift out across the closet door and entry into the room and brought it over here into the middle between Blair and Cordon. But again, otherwise, he pretty much kept this design the same. With the code 83 radius of 28 inches and minimum turnouts being number 6. So these, I saw these via email and I thought they were interesting, but again, in conversations with Chris, he has come back to that he really likes the design and flow of this, that has had the input from not just from me, but from others involved with the layout design SIG, as well as some other folks. And I think it looks like this will be a interesting and fun layout to operate on. He's got the 28 inch mainline curves. You see back here in the back, I don't know if you can see the purple color here on these tracks going around in the back, but he says they're an inch higher for kind of a visual separation from the yard here, which is, I think that'll work. And because you've got enough length here and over here that you can climb the grade up, and having that separated will be good. He's decided he's going to mount this on L brackets off the walls. He's going to use 2-inch foam on 1/2-inch plywood for basic construction. He's planning to use Baltic birch plywood instead of the standard 1x stock to avoid the issues and problems of warping and twisting and etc. when we go and buy lumber at our favorite big box store. And then another concept that he wants to incorporate, I think you saw this somewhere in the layout.
Yes.
Of along the front fascia of having some sort of a tray accessible, that all the wiring and connections would be here along the front. So you don't have to crawl underneath or be on your back looking up and dropping hot solder on your face as you're making those connections. And I know in all the layout tours I've been on, I've seen that where someone's had a hinged access door that would maybe drop down off the fascia. where all the wiring was run right in the front. I've seen other people will use plastic gutter like you'd put on your house, and they will use that as a trough around on the inside of the fascia to keep all that wiring contained in one location. And so they have a place. So if you drop a wire nut, it's not dropping all the way to the floor. It just drops into that piece of gutter. So I thought that's a great idea, and it's certainly something that I would think about in the future if I was building another layout. So, and then I've just got one last image. After all this, Chris went home and he started mocking up, you see boxes stacked up on garbage cans and sawhorses and cut out cardboard. There you can see the garage or the closet door. And so he's starting to play with what will it really fit, and what will it look like? You can see he's been using his CAD program to print out the track plans, and the Sheraton and Boyer Railroad is maybe taking shape in the very near future. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and we will go to the question session.
All right, I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, let me go and see if there was any immediate questions. If you have questions, go
Well,
ahead.
I see one's popped up here.
Yeah.
We got several in the chat.
There's one about, can you explain the description of the wiring tray a little bit more?
A little bit more, okay. What I've seen is, gutter to catch the water running off the roof of your house is just kind of, it's a long trough type of, and I would use plastic because it'd be so easy to cut, and you can get that at any big box store. And you just fasten it to the legs of your bench work underneath the bench work. And it's a place that you can run all the wires pretty much together without having to drill holes and lose track of them. It's, you can tag it, keep them color coded, tag them with tags. It's easy to access the wire nuts if you're connected that way, or the suitcase connectors, or even if you're soldering wiring together. I've not done it myself. I've just have seen it on other layouts, but it's something that it may be worth thinking about. Certainly the access doors, you can see in the photo behind me here, you can see my bench work is just a standard 1x4 bench work with legs coming down. And I have wires hanging underneath that I try to tack up there out of the way. But I've seen this work well on some especially large layouts. When you're running your bus wire for your DCC system, your throttle cables, your signal cabling and stuff, you get a lot of wiring underneath the layout. And having it all towards the front where you can get to it without being on your back is very convenient for a lot of people. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, and there's, I think somebody made a comment, which I agree somewhat with about, and it really depends on the complexity of your layout, having worked in electronics for a long time. Depending upon what all you were talking about, just the DC bus, that tray idea really doesn't have a lot of problem but once you talk about you have power supplies for lights and turnouts and things like that, well, then you start talking about inductance of wires and creating
Yes.
magnetic fields. And so you got to think about it. For some layout, that might be a really good idea. You also could be creating yourself without proper shielding problems. That's my personal opinion. But I think somebody else made that comment about that, and I'd kind of like to, I kind of agree with it. Though that might not stop me from doing the tray idea for a certain set of the wiring that you want to do. So I think you got to think about that and how complicated electronic wise you are. You got switches, signaling, occupation, and running LCC, DCC, you need to think about inductance and that on the tray idea. Though many people have done it, and it seems to be working for them. So,
Mhm.
and you can read about DCC, and you'll get multiple answers of whether those wires should be twisted against with each other, separated apart from each other. And Digitrax will say one thing, and NCE will say another thing of it. So, you kind of have to decide what you're going to work with. There's a question. Did you see the question that just came in?
I've seen several of them pop up in here, and I just,
There's
letting
one
you
about
run the.
how would you operate this layout? For example, do trains coordinate the yard?
Well, that's a good question. Chris has not had any experience with operations to speak of. Like I said, he was here at my layout yesterday, and we gave him an easy job where he had to stand up on a step stool.
And clean track.
And clean track, yeah, well, we have those problems. But yeah, I would say that, you could start with a train in the yard. Maybe have an assignment to run over to the interchange track where you would pick up the cars that were there on the interchange track, bring them back in the yard, sort them into a train that might, depending on what needed to go where. You could actually have a couple trains, one running down to Cordon to work the battery factory, another train going into Mo Valley to work the lumberyard and feed mill, etc. He mentioned shipping grain to the ethanol plant, so you would have a train that could be dedicated to that service that would make the complete loop around the layout as it goes from Mo Valley up to all the way around to Blair, which is like 2 miles across the river, but we want to take advantage of the layout and run all the track we can. So but I would start with trains in the yard, or you might have a dedicated train already at the elevator where it's been loaded up, and so the next session it's ready to head out. I don't know, how many people were you thinking of having to operate?
I would guess maybe 4. It's
Okay.
not a lot.
Well, and because you're still new to the idea of operations, it's, you're not quite sure either, and I
Right.
understand that.
Yeah.
I have a layout that will handle 20 people, so it's a whole different ball of wax for me. So hopefully that helped a little bit. That's me talking off the top of my head, which, I'm a preacher, I'm good at doing that. So let's find another question, Chris.
Yeah, Jim Robertson, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question you had there? I think that's a good one.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Some of the designs indicated that there was staging underneath to the bottom left, and I wasn't sure if that was in the final design or not, and it wasn't clear to me how trains would get down there, what the grade would be, what amount of clearance there would be to get fingers into that staging area, and what that staging area might look like. So I was just hoping to hear a little bit more about that.
I tried working out what the grades would have to be, and I abandoned that idea of staging beneath this table.
So those were just aspirational in some of the early designs, but not to be pursued after more analysis.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I did see, I think Travers posted a note that the purple tracks that were on the 1 inch higher elevation could potentially be staging tracks, and where you would have a couple trains staged up there and they could come down in, and a 1 inch separation and about 15 feet is not a very steep grade to contend with. So is that correct, Travers? I see
You need
he's
to
trying to unmute
unmute
himself.
yourself, Travers.
There, he's got it.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm thinking. And by expanding the purple track to maybe 3 tracks, you'd be able to have an eastbound train and a westbound train come in and then work your yard and go back, or have a through train come back there. And that staging area gives you the connection to the rest of the world.
Good suggestion. Thank you. Yes. My secretary here is taking notes. So,
So one of the,
I saw Victor early on had a question about metal benchwork. And I don't, we haven't discussed actual construction too much. I saw your note there about the birch plywood, but we did not discuss what materials you were planning to use in this construction. Have you given much thought to that yet?
I'm a woodworker for years and years, so that's my material I know best, but I'm open to anything that works.
So I know there's been some wonderful layouts built using metal studs, and others that they've got access to a welder or pipe or square tubing. Some clubs that have built some very substantial benchwork that you can stand on. If you're filling a very large space, that's certainly one way to go. But again, it's the expertise. I'm like Chris. My background is working with wood, and so I think nothing of grabbing a saw and cutting boards. So that's.
But maybe I could justify buying a welder.
I'm going to leave that between you and your wife. I'm retired now. I don't get into this, marriage counseling, whatever. So, so let's see.
so one I'd like to go ahead and answer. Angel had a question there about how do I go about getting their layout submitted for evaluation consultation, and I'd just like to say, there's multiple ways. Obviously, convention, regional division, or national are always good ways. But probably the easiest way is to either submit and make sure you include your givens and druthers in it, and then whatever sizing you have, and then take them to either our Facebook LDSIG group, Facebook group, not the page, but the group, or the Group IO LDSIG group. You will get more feedback than you probably want, but you also probably one of the best ways to get a connection to an individual who might be in your area, or you could also do it virtually. But that would be the easiest way. Anything you want to add to that, Travers or Cal or Doug?
Yeah, I would say, working with Chris, because he lived just 25 miles away, and here in Iowa, that just means getting on an empty highway and driving. It was easy to get together. We did a lot via back and forth with email, and including sharing some of the sketches and drawings that he did. And, I'm not opposed to doing this with anybody. I've had the chance to be a consultant at some of the national conventions where we sit down at a table and someone brings in some sketches and drawings, or they just want to talk because they don't even know what a givens and druthers means. What does that, explain to me what that means or what I need to know. So sometimes a consultation might begin that simple. The givens are things like, I got this fixed space, it's this size, and it's got a door here and a window here, and what can I build in that space? Givens are, I would really like to have, but I know it's not going to be possible. I see Matt Thompson popped up here. Matt and I consulted a while back on the meatpacking plant that he built. Now he's moved, torn that down, and building a new one. So I got to get hold of Matt here and find out what he's doing. But it's been interesting. You go to conventions, you tour layouts. People are continually taking photographs, making notes. If they see something and, oh, I want to incorporate that in my layout, or I like what they've done, like the piece of gutter trough to collect all the wires in one place was just, yeah, that works well. So that's I'm rambling. Go on. What next, Chris?
It's a question about what factor made you decide on the G rather than the Komoski exam.
Kolinsky, yeah.
Yeah, and the lift out.
I just think I will like the continuous running. That pure and simple. And the lift out just looks like it's a problem that can be solved, but if it's a problem I can avoid, I would rather avoid it.
And that's, you know, that one of the important things about when you're doing a consultation or, you know, looking at getting feedback is there is no here's the best layout. It's here's the best layout for you. And two different examples, one might work for somebody that, but the other person, it's just not what they want. And it's really hard to get to the bottom of the givens and druthers sometimes about what's important to somebody. So
Sure.
you got to make sure your consultant is being true to what you want. And then that's your job of being, you know, a client of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
along,
you know, I want to add, I know Travers is jumping in here too, that it looked to me like the G shape would give you a much longer run versus what Kleminski came up with, because you're essentially running around the space twice with that G shaped loop, whereas Kleminski's is a once around the room and crossing over the aisle with the lift out. But with the G shape where the loop returns and goes back on itself, sure, you're going through the same scene or similar scenes twice with your train, but you've got a much longer run, and in smaller spaces, that's one of the compromises we sometimes have to make. So,
Well, and
Can
he
I,
mentioned that as a trade-off. That folded dog bone, which is basically what the G is, those curves take a heck of a lot of space unless you make them really tight.
yeah.
So he was preferring the stub end, and I think there's kind of a trend towards shelf layouts more recently, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll try this. Maybe I'll say he was right. Maybe I'll be happy with it.
Yeah.
well, you know, can I throw something in there, Doug? You know, Tom is doing some pretty good things in terms of getting a lot of industries in there. But
Yeah.
one thing I've found with layouts that are really rectilinear like that, and this is especially true, I think, in a small space, is those corners end up with a lot of space that's not all that useful. I would certainly curve it more and perhaps pinch it in a little bit more at the base and then flare out to the blob at the end. That has minimal impact on the aisle. It's a very short choke point, but gives you more working space down in the corners, and you can put that space where you've curved. You know, just imagine, you know, curves intersecting the tangents of the squares he's got. You know, I mean, that's great if you're doing doors, but frankly, I did doors myself and found they didn't work all that well. Different discussion. But in fact, you end up losing some space that can be used for extending spurs and for scenic effects. So I think I'd stay more with the curves and less with the squares.
Mm-hmm. And I will comment when, you know, my move 3 years ago, I did some rearranging with my layout, and that's one of the things I did was I incorporated a big blob and it got away from the rectangular shapes I had been doing. And Seth and Travers have been here and operated, and they can probably attest to that. But it gave me more railroad in the given square footage that I had. So
Yeah,
now,
and I think it helps the people flow also.
yes.
You know, stuff on your belt, stuff in your pocket tends to snag on the sharp corners.
Mhm. So Travers, you were wanting to jump in.
yeah, it sounds like there's some people that don't really know what they want in order to develop the list of givens and druthers. And the suggestion there is visit as many layouts as you possibly can and even volunteer to join a work group in your area. And if you go once a week or once a month or what have you, you'll develop a cadre of people that you'd be able to bounce ideas off of, as well as recruit for help when it comes time to build your railroad. But the idea of submitting your ideas to the group's IO or the LDSIG Facebook group, you can certainly get a lot of opinions, and model
And
railroads
opinions are like what, Travers?
Yeah. So you got to sort out what it is you really want, but the only way to do that is to get involved, and really the operating groups are very helpful for this. The OPSIG people, and going to operate on layouts is even better than just visiting layouts.
Yes, and I would certainly affirm that as well. Attending, I started years ago attending the NMRA national conventions, and then started learning about things that were in my area or areas that I lived or traveled in. So it's been a wonderful insight. And if I was to start over again from what I started 40 years ago, I would probably build a slightly different layout. So there was a question about, how do you contact and make the arrangements for a consultation like this? There are LDSIG members all across the country. Those of us who get to the national conventions or some of the regional conventions with the NMRA are certainly willing to get involved or assist. There's no cost involved with this directly, except for me, it might be traveling to someone's house, the expense of the gas in the car type thing, or the time on the computer and the internet. This is a hobby. I'm an MMR. I'm obligated with that designation at helping others in the hobby, and I'm more than happy to do that. And people, are free to contact me, email me, and we can get started, or I can direct you to someone else who's, I know a few names on here where we can get started that way. Chris gave you some great suggestions about the Yahoo, or not Yahoo groups anymore. It's Groups.io, the website, the email list, etc. And he's been posting that in the chat as well. So I know Seth, particularly on the West Coast, they've been trying to hold layout design gatherings where people can, come and maybe sit down with a group or sit down with a one-on-one consultation at a gathering at some hotel or convention center. So I don't know. Yes,
So
Chris.
also one thing I'd like to add to that is that I've been toying around with possibly setting up. So I'd really like to know the interest. So you could either, if you're interested, you could either just drop a note in chat, or if you haven't done the survey yet, put it there. But back in this, when we had the Santa Clara convention, which was a virtual convention, we set up a way to sign up for virtual consultations. So we had a methodology for signing up. We assigned you to somebody, and that was all done virtually. Is that something that interests you? Thinking about maybe doing that outside of the convention timeframe. But I'd like to know how much interest there is on that. Okay, so I'm not sure if I missed any of people put questions in chat. If I did, feel free to unmute yourself and just put out your question there. I think somebody did have a question about, was there any costs of these consultations? And the answer is no. You can go out and find somebody to pay to have a design done, but when we're talking about what the LDSIG does, that is no charge. So anybody,
I did have a question that I don't think got addressed yet, and that's how many people would you foresee operating the layout? And that did get answered in terms of 4. I'm a little concerned with aisle space for 4 people in the pinch points in the layout as designed. Could you comment on that?
I will say Chris is skinnier than I am, so it might work.
We could have skinny operators or tighter curves.
Yeah, there are 2 pinch points that are down to around 22, 24 inches, which is, well, that was the minimum that I would go at a pinch point, but they're also on curves, so you get past that initial point and it expands into a little bit opener area. And I know when we were looking at that G plan, there's space for a couple people to congregate there near the closet and entry, and then you get past that G on the other side, there's space for several people. But back in the corner, there might be only room for 1 person. But if you're only talking 4 people and you can find 3 or 4 spots where people could be, sometimes you might just pass something on to someone else. You get a train into the yard and someone else takes it on over to the industry instead of physically moving over there. Or as you know, on some op sessions, you team up, you have a 2-person team. One's running the throttle and the other one's handling the paperwork and giving instructions. And there's been times when I was the engineer and the person giving me instructions was standing clear over at the other side of the layout because there wasn't physically room for 2 of us to be in that space. So I was physically running I was running the train and control, and the other person was over there actually coupling and uncoupling cars and dropping them. And sometimes we were doing with hand signals, and so I had to learn hand signals. Turned out to be a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. So there are many different ways to hold an op session and host an event to have people come in. So, yeah. And I see several people are coming. I'd like to have, a virtual consultation, et cetera. And again, that's something that the LDSIG is about. We have, what is it, right around 1,000 members.
Yeah.
And some are very experienced as far as consulting with and looking at a design or plan or a list of givens and druthers to assist folks. And other members are, boy, they're like a lot of you are brand new at this and don't even know where to begin. And I'll say, this is a pencil. Get a piece of paper, a napkin, a marker. One of the important things is, what space do you have? Make sure you have a tape measure and measure that space exact, because so many people have done a sketch and then they found out that a number 6 turnout takes a lot more space than they anticipated, and their sketch won't fit into the given space. So I studied architecture and took drafting classes, and so for me that's not an issue, but for other people, trying to sketch something out is very difficult. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask if you've got other modelers in the area. You got a hobby shop that you go to. Mention it, maybe even put a note up on the bulletin board if they got one at the hobby shop, or again, email the OPSIG list. I see, there's most of the board members are here at the moment, but there are many others. I even see Doug Gurin is on here, and Doug is a long time, he's the one that got this started way back when I was just a pup. And he might ramble on a bit, but he's one that you can talk to.
Imagine that, a model railroader rambling on. But Doug, actually, one interesting thing you did raise that we may want to feature in a future one of these events is managing the choke points. Because the people flow is just as important in ops as the flow of the train. So, and that's a rock, I've seen some otherwise very nice railroads. I wouldn't say founder on, but certainly a little rough sailing through there.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point too. A question that we hadn't asked was this layout intended to be an operating layout, or just something for someone to display their modeling skills and interest in trains? If it's just for an individual or just to share with a family member, that's one approach to designing a layout. But if you want to operate and you plan to have a group of people come in, limited by the space you have, then you need to think more about aisle space, pinch points. Where are people going to be standing to work in the yard versus a train going, someone going by you with a train? Because you certainly don't want a yard space where the 21-inch pinch point is. And I'm thinking of one layout I went to recently where there had 3 levels. The lowest level you had to be on your hands and knees. It was a staging yard, but it was hand thrown turnouts down there. And there was a yard right above that. And so there were 2 or 3 people working the yard, and you had to be down there trying to get your train out of staging on your hands and knees. It did not work well.
Well, I think Chris did have a pretty good concept of what he wanted. And I think that's what helped. And as I see it, the concept was bring back memories of places that are important to me, that are connected to the railroad. And that's what I want to incorporate and include in the layout. From there, the question goes to one that was asked earlier in terms of how do you want to operate this railroad, or how would you operate this railroad? And thinking about more than just running the train around the loop.
Yes. And I will admit I didn't give much thought to the operations end. It was just construction. What would fit in this space that matched the Givens and the Druthers? So I see Froland just popped up. Use the mock-up with the cardboard and have 4 people join you in the room and see how they fit. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah. So, and don't make it be the grandkids, because they're not as big as some of us adults. But of course, you can invite the neighbors in and they'll think you're really crazy, but that's a different matter.
You never know. You might recruit an operator that way. It's happened many times.
That is so true. All of us could hold an open house. I've gotten in the habit of now I do an open house around my birthday. This is a good excuse to have a gathering of friends that are of like interest. We used to do it at Christmas time. Now we do it on my birthday in the summertime. But it's just, yeah, so.
Well, I really appreciate all of this feedback, and thanks to Doug and Seth for kicking this off. When I was out in Sacramento, I've got a whole page and a half of notes here, and I don't know if I'll end up with a perfect layout, but I am ready to start moving forward and start building bench work. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now, Chris Mesa, I've seen several people have asked the question about, is this, we know this is being recorded, or I'm assuming the chat's recorded as well, and this will be made available on the website so people can come.
Yeah, it'll take me a couple days to edit the video. I got to go install the software on my PC still, but yeah, that'll be there also, and I'll put your slides there, the slides there too, if you don't mind.
Okay, yes, and I will send you the latest update with those other sketches that you did not get from me earlier. So
there was also a question that came in from Ken and Oxnard. Did you see that one?
No, I've been trying to scroll through that, but I haven't caught everything.
Ken, do you want to unmute and ask yourself?
Oh, okay. I'm because of limited space, I'm considering building a garage. So I don't want to hear about all the complaints about thinking about the garage. But to allow the cars to still go in, I'm thinking of just building shelf layout around the walls. And to get things going, just thinking of doing this modular piece by piece. And up to now, I was just picking places that, or one place that I thought was interesting to me, and thinking and planning out the track on that one module. I was wondering, but I still wonder, and one input as to, do you think I should go ahead and plan the entire layout eventually that would be built? Or is it okay just do module at a time design?
Well, Ken, I will say that parts of my layout have been in 12 houses. And there's been modifications every time I've moved. And so it's been expanded and rebuilt and et cetera. I also see you're in Oxnard. Is that up near San Francisco somewhere?
No, that's near Bruce, though.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very much near Bruce.
Well, you know,
Yeah,
I would
I've
suggest,
I've gone to the Santa Barbara pop sessions where Bruce is.
okay, all right. Yeah, because I know you know, there's layout. California doesn't have basements like we do in Iowa. So they convert garages into storage of model trains instead of vehicles. I know that Jim Providenza accommodates a vehicle in his garage where he's got one shelf that is right where the garage door is. You drive underneath it. You just don't wear a top hat in the convertible when you pull in. And he
So-
backs the car out for op sessions.
So Ken, you know, my thoughts on that is I don't think you want to do a module in isolation if your plan is to have more than one. You know, where is this thing going to go? I don't think you have to have the whole layout planned completely, but what is the flow of the layout going to be? And you can build one at a time. That's fine. But I think you want to know what is the flow. And when I say flow, where is this train going to go to after this? What kind of train is going to come in here? You know, what do I want to see? Or maybe it's what kind of scenery do you want to have over there? Depends on what's important to you. But I do think you want to have a general flow of the layout with major aspects of it before you build, you know, one module.
Expanding on that, I think that this goes back to what we talk about in boot camp and make only new mistakes. It's important to have a concept for the overall railroad before you get into the details of what track is going to go where and what industry is it going to serve. I think that you need to think about, as Chris says, what's the traffic going to be like on the entire layout before you build one module and then find that that doesn't quite fit with the overall plan that you have. So that would be my comment.
I think though that using modules gives you the flexibility to build stuff in a hurry. You can come back and flesh them in further, and if you don't like the result, you know, it's just one module or one section. And because it's in your garage, I mean, they don't have to strictly be modules in the I'm compatible with this or that modular standard set sense. It can be, you know, any more or less standard section that works for you. And in fact, they don't even have to be all that standard. So, you know, the bridging the T-Bird module, to use Providence's example, could be very different in format from the let's build several in a ring around the wall to, you know, replicate our main line in some key industries. So I think it's probably a good, you know, it would facilitate you walking away from some early mistakes. It allows you to build quick, you know, not being afraid that you're locked into a bad solution later. And, you know, I think the most important thing is to get out there and build something right away. And this is a fairly clean way to do that while being able to upgrade or change later. Anyway, I'm rambling.
Yeah. And getting,
I would-
Go-
Yeah, Okay, yeah, I would just add to it that there's no reason why, I mean, it's good to have an overall idea of what you're doing, but, you know, as you go on, you realize that you want to rework some of the stuff you haven't built yet, no problem at all. You're not locked into the design.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and I'll add to, you know, to that. And when I say you should have a design of the flow in the industry I worked in, we either had a highly spec model or you had a prototyping model. And there's advantages to both. The advantages to a highly spec model is you do it once and you hope you get it right. The other one, if you're okay with doing things more than once, and you'd like the design process of, hey, I'm just going to go build it, I'm going to get it up there, and knowing that you're going to go make it better the next time, then go for it. Just go build what you have in mind and see how it works. So there's those two different mindsets, and they're both valid. And we use them in industry all the time, depending upon what mode we were in.
I will add, I mentioned earlier, I've been in 12 houses. I designed from the get-go into sections similar to modules. They were designed so that they fit through any doorway or up any stairway. And if I was looking at a garage where I'm looking at maybe a narrow shelf, I would give thought to some general dimensions on the bench work that would work in that space. Also, you need to consider what vehicles are going to be stored in that garage, or what other items, lawn mowers, bicycles, camping equipment, whatever may accumulate. And don't plan just to fit around a given vehicle you currently own, because 3 years from now, you may have a different vehicle in there completely that might not fit if you've upgraded to something that's bigger. I'm also recalling a number of years ago when Tony Custer tore out his old layout and built a new one. He went into the garage and measured, and he expanded his basement layout into the garage space in the sense that he went over the hood of his wife's car with a kind of a big box that he was able to incorporate into the layout on the other side of the wall. But his wife was still able to pull a car in and park it. He just couldn't change the oil or check the air filter because he couldn't open the hood. But it was something they did for that. So there are various ways around things like that. I've also seen garages where they've built an entire layout in there that was physically not attached to the walls. It could have been almost pulled out on a skid if need be to vacate the garage or the house. But the other thing with building in sections or modules, if you build, say, a grain elevator complex, or you start planning one, and then you've got it up there on the wall in the garage, and you're going, I just don't like this. It's just not working out right. You can pull that section out, trash it, convert the grain elevator into an ethanol plant, or an automobile factory or something, and you're not destroying the whole layout in the process. You're just making changes on one small piece of footprint. And you can even build several modules that might be stored up higher on the shelf when you bring the grain elevator down for one session, and then you put that up there and you bring in the automobile plant, assembly plant, for another session. Or you start thinking that way, and you get a lot more versatility and your chance to select different industries that you really would like, but you can't get them all into the same space. So.
Yeah, one other thing, take a look at David, if you have access to the old MR articles, or somebody has copies you can look at the old David Barrows series of building things in sections. And if you build it, and if you don't like what you built, like to add on to what Doug was saying, if you don't like what you built in the grain elevator, move it. You may want to rearrange. If you build it in sections, you may decide you want things in a totally different order. And if you build it in sections, there are advantages, particularly along a wall of a garage, of just rearranging things, or a very small basement where you have to leave the middle open for the kids to play in. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, a garage, you want to conscious, if you got a 4-door car and you pull it in there, you open a door, you got so much room to open the door into. But boy, if you take a two-door car in there, the doors are bigger and longer, and you may suddenly be crunching a layout if you've traded cars in that regard. So you need to give thought to what will be in the garage besides the layout. As you know, the height of the shelf, how much space have you got for the width? You might want to say, you know, reconsider, should I do this N scale versus HO? I can remember my grandfather had a piece of plywood hinged to the wall where my uncles had their Lionel train set. And it folded up against the wall, and they had to back the car out to fold it down so they could play with trains. So, yeah, and I see Ken's asking what year with David Barrows. That was pretty much in the 80s and early 90s, if I recall correctly. So
I think so. I certainly that was some of my inspiration. You get a fairly linear plan doing that, but it works and it goes up fast. And as Philip said, you can rearrange them if you need to. And you know, very often after running it a little bit, that may turn out to be a great idea. So you know, that's that, you know, he's a very smart guy, has very good ideas, and they're still relevant today. I just stay away from the hollow core doors. If you're tempted to do it, contact me offline, and I'll tell you why you don't want to.
Somebody asked about what would be the #1 book, and I would say
Armstrong.
John Armstrong's. It was edited 3 times or what have you, but it talks about the prototype, talks about how to model prototype, how to condense it down, and it goes through the whole idea of designing and planning a layout.
Seth, you got a book? Yeah. Track plans for
Be
realistic
careful about-
operations. Yep.
Yeah.
You have to be careful about some of those early plans because the aisles are impractical and the reach is impossible.
Yeah, John was a skinny Scotsman, and having been to his layout just where he passed, yet with a lot of current size model railroaders with 24-inch aisles, it did not work. And he designed that layout, his own layout, for tower operation, not for walk around. So yeah, the aisles 24 inches will not work. I'd heavily suggest reconsidering that if you have more than one person that's going to be in there, or you're not doing tower operations.
Yeah, having been a regular on an Armstrong design layout, I got to say he was a runty little guy.
Yeah, skinny Scotsman is what I think the DC guys basically called him. So
Yeah, I knew someone who took one of his plans that was done for O scale. They shrunk it down to HO scale, and they didn't expand the aisles enough.
Well, the biggest thing, you need to build it high enough so the pot bellies will go underneath the benchwork. Which is a problem. I'm fairly tall. I have a bunch of shorter operators, and I've had to lower some of my yards so they can get in and reach better. And it's fortunately I have large aisles, but that is a consideration if you got limited space. The height of the layout may allow you to go with a little bit narrow space, but if you got someone who maybe is dealing with something like a walker or a wheelchair, or you want to do a sit down where you're on roller, off roller office chairs of some sort, you've got to have a much bigger space. I know one layout I operate on occasionally, one of his main yards is run by a couple guys on roller chairs, and getting past them in that aisle as they're working that lower yard and you're running a train on the upper shelf is a problem. So
all right. I want to just first of all thank both Doug and Chris for their time putting this together. Really appreciate it. I think that was good. Like I said, I will have this published out here in the next few days, and we'll get a message out when that's done. But so thanks everyone.
Well, thank you, Chris, for organizing this and putting it together. And Chris, unfortunately, had to leave, something about meeting his wife at the airport, so he had to scoot out. and I know others have had to leave, but yeah, those of us who are members of the LDSIG board can certainly guide you and direct you to maybe someone in your area who might be able to assist in some way. But it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to meeting some of you at some future convention where we can discuss this in person. So.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Mhm.